As many people know, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which became law on December 6, 1865, abolishes slavery, except when one is found guilty of committing a crime. Up to this point in this nation's history, slavery had never been a form of punishment for any kind of crime. But when we observe the outcome of this clause within this amendment after the fact, we can clearly see that this clause gave birth to the mass incarceration of the formerly enslaved, and it still has a devastating effect on the Negro race even today. But that is not the shocking part of this amendment. Not by a long shot. What is shocking is the history behind the 13th Amendment of 1865. The 13th Amendment was actually a creation of the Southern Democrats. Its original designation was House Resolution Number 80. It was also known as the Corwin Amendment, named after a man named Thomas Corwin. He was a House representative, and at the same time, he held a seat in the Senate. What none of us were ever told was the original language of the 13th Amendment after it passed the House and then the Senate, and was sent to the desk of the incoming President, Abraham Lincoln, on March 2, 1861. It says, and I quote, "No amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give Congress the power to abolish or interfere within any state with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of persons held in labor or service by the laws of said state." Well, there you have it. Now, this amendment does not specifically say the word slave, but we all know who the persons were that were held in labor and services. The key word here is held. This Article 13 was signed by the Speaker of the House, the Vice President, and the outgoing President, James Buchanan. You must have a few questions brewing in your mind. My question is, why was Congress so willing to pass this 13th Amendment? To essentially give the Southern slave states a constitutional right to keep and own slaves at such a time when the Civil War over this issue was looming. A bigger question is, since the right to keep and own slaves was virtually given to the Southern states on a silver platter, why did they walk away from the table? A little over a month later, on April 12, 1861, the Confederate Army fired at Fort Sumter, which started the Civil War. But why? What was more important than slavery that caused the Southern states to secede and rebel against their own countrymen, government, and constitution? The biggest question of all is, why was this fact of history not included in the history books, movies, and speeches that have been made since the Union won their victory over the Confederate States? This all goes back to pride and gratitude. White people can come away with a sense of pride, believing that their ancestors fought to free the slaves, while not knowing that slavery was not the main issue that caused this war. Or why else would the Southern states walk away from the table when they had an amendment that gave them the right to own slaves and preemptively struck the Union in order to get the ball rolling concerning this war? While the descendants of the United States colored troops and former slaves would learn that the United States intentionally stood against slavery in order to end it. All the while, knowing that if this part of history was ever known to the descendants of the brave Negro men who fought for their freedom and the freedom of their children, that they would never develop a sense of gratitude while knowing this truth. By allowing these same former slaves and their descendants to know the truth, the gratitude will then be for the United States colored troops. They would know that the United States Army was fighting to keep the Union alive, and the Union was losing. If it were not for the United States colored troops, the Union would have ceased to exist sometime between 1863 and 1864. Even Abraham Lincoln understood this when he said, and I quote, "What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union." The next time someone says,
"My ancestors fought to free your ancestors,"
these are those who want you to have that gratitude. Show that person the pride you have in the United States colored troops and say to them,
"My ancestors fought for freedom and helped to save this country in order to secure our freedom."
Now, you tell me, who should have a sense of gratitude for who? If you've been to this channel more than once, please subscribe, as it truly does help the channel. Leave a comment, for the Bang looks forward to reading them and replying to them. Also, don't forget to like and share this content with like-minded individuals such as yourself. There is plenty more where this came from. Until next time, this Bang content will end in 3, 2, 1.